Hey, welcome to the Backyard Professor live videos. I've been doing quite a few recordings this last week, so forgive me for that. And I had a heck of a day on New Year's with my electronics issues, so I did not get a live session on New Year's. So Happy New Year's to you, my lovely audience. I have Dennis MacDonald in the studio to talk with us about his new book. And this is a significant milestone. I am thrilled to death to be able to talk with him about it. And I've read many of his other books. So let's get this show on the road and get started. Let me turn my sound down real quick so this doesn't clobber your eardrums. And let's go. Woohoo! Yeah, baby. That's from Mark Crispin. All right, my heater just kicked on. Sorry for the noise. It'll shut off just shortly. I turned it down. Hey, I have just a brief announcement, and then we will start talking with Dr. MacDonald and his new book, a new book that you must get. You'll cheat yourselves if you don't get this one. My announcement is this Sunday live with Dan Vogel. I had a good conversation with him this afternoon, and he is raring to go. He is so excited he can't hardly see straight. So don't forget Sunday night, 6 o'clock, and we'll get our beloved Mormon historian. In the meantime, let's have our beloved classical and biblical historian and scholar come on here. And we are in for an education tonight. I am thrilled to bring back my dear and good friend, Dennis R. MacDonald. Hello, Dennis. How are you?
Hey, Kerry. It's so good to be back, and how generous you are to your viewers.
Well, my viewers are the best viewers in the world, as far as I'm concerned, just like my guests. So, okay, so how have you been since I last saw you?
Well, I'm aging like everyone else, and I'm living in political nonsense, so like everybody else. So, and I'm living in a world in which there is a lot of suffering and inequality. And I wish I could do more about that. I consider my work to be a part of a larger cultural battle to make sure that terribly is not a part of the problem. And so I mean, that's terribly optimistic and probably egotistical, but it's one of the few things I can do apart from, recycling garbage.
There you go. There you go. Well, I'll tell you what, when I get to be your age, I hope I am as robust and energetic and still gung-ho and sharp in my mind as you are, because your contributions to New Testament scholarship, and I'm not just buttering you up here, I have been so blessed to have been able to read. I don't think I have all your books. I got the majority of them, but I've been looking on Amazon.com, and there is a couple that I've missed along the way. But I think for the most part, I've got the complete gist of what you're doing. And I'll tell you what, the two things that have happened to me from reading your materials that I want my audience to grasp. Now, my audience at this point knows I'm not a scholar, but I'm serious about studying the scholars. And so
I would say there's a difference between a scholar and an intellectual. And Carrie, you certainly are an intellectual.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you to say.
The scholarly piece comes with some more discipline and training and recognition that way. But my guess is that lots of the people who are watching us today are themselves intellectuals. Yes. And these are people who are willing to question authority. They're willing to open up questions and to be creative in the solutions. And that's really where the intellectual center of religious discourse ought to be. It ought not to be in universities, at least not solely. It's got to be now in the public media and workplaces like the backyard.
Exactly right. And that's why I so appreciate you being so willing to come on, because I want to bring the academia, I want to bring the scholars to the public. We are starving intellectually and spiritually.
I think so. Yeah.
Because we hear the same thing in church year after year, and we know we're capable of more. We just don't know where to look. You are one of those wonderful guiding lights. So your work, and I get it. I know you are a pioneer, and your breaking work is I won't say a jolt, but it's new even to the scholars. And so it takes time to break into this. Now, it's not because your work is difficult to read. I can tell you right now, if I can read your stuff, and I really can, and totally enjoy it, then any of my audience can. And I do have a wonderful, really intelligent audience. Hey, all you guys, I see y'all. Yeah, I see y'all. I'm just saying hi to all of you totally for right now, because I want to get on with thank you for coming, all you guys. We're going to have a question and answer session too, but first, the book, the text, I'm not trying to take away from Dr. MacDonald's time here, but this text, brand new text out, Synopses of Epic, Tragic, and the Gospel, or Tragedy and the Gospels. And it's 3 volumes in one, you guys. It's a steal. Do you know if it's still on sale, Dennis?
I want to put it in a context, Carrie.
Oh, okay.
You have spent probably almost $400 in my books.
Yes, I have.
You can get this on Amazon right now for $22.
Oh my goodness!
This is 570 pages as a reference work. It is not an argument. It's a reference work that you can go to see what parallels there might be in Greek poetry, which has been so sadly ignored in scholarship and in the church. So for the amount of money that you have spent, for a fraction of it, people can have a distillation and a mature appreciation of it. Yeah. It would I don't want to be a hard sale on this, but it really matters to me that the copies of this book, as a part of my legacy, get out there. And I think it can be used in religious education. I think it can be used devotionally for people. I think it can be used in apologetics and argumentation and so on. I'm not trying to control how it gets used, but this material needs to be out there, and it needs to be accessible to people in English in more or less understandable ways. And I'm so appreciative of you and Derek Lambert and others who have kind of done a end run on the Academy and seen, this stuff needs to be out there. But in addition to buying the book, I would so appreciate people who feel appreciative for it, even if they're modestly critical of it, to do an Amazon review.
Oh, yes.
This is important for people who are exploring it. It puts the book higher on the register for Amazon for promotion and so on.
Yeah, I will get there. What I would like to do, it may take me a little while because I would like to at least I probably won't read it cover to cover, but I do want to take some time to learning. It's not technically like you're saying, it's a fantastic I love how you've laid this out, Dennis, how you've shown the parallels. And if I understand right now, you translated all of the Greek. These are your translations, correct?
Everything that is in the book is my translation, except for a few passages where I cite another translation. But all the Homeric imitations are mine. Translations are mine. All from Greek. All the ones from Virgil's Aeneid in Latin are mine. All the ones from the New Testament are mine. And the reason for it, Carrie, is when a classicist is going to treat the Homeric epics with a certain aesthetic. And biblical scholars are going to orient themselves in their translations to a certain religious aesthetic when it comes to translating the Gospels. But these texts are much more similar to each other when they're seen in translation, because the similarities have to do mostly with characterization and motifs and common mythemes. So the philology of the niceties of the difference between Homeric Greek and Koine Greek are not as important as the thematic and characterization, which brings me to another issue, which we talked in preparing for this, you and I.
Yeah.
Namely, that biblical scholars have been prone to understand gospel authors as scribes. And this is really not the way most ancients worked. They worked as artists, and they rewrote with mimesis. That is, they didn't use sources so much as models. And these models are often, and you can see it with the use of the Hebrew Bible. Some of these texts are modeled after texts from the Hebrew Bible. But if you don't know the Homeric epics, if you don't know Virgil's Aeneid, if you don't know Athenian tragedy, you're going to miss so many of the parallels in the Gospels. And so this book is intended to be a reference work. We joked about this earlier as we prepared. I told you to read only the first 20 pages because
I did.
In the first 20 pages, that'll tell you what this book's about. But after that, it's a phone book. It's an encyclopedia. It's a reference work. And it's got an argument that's tacit to it, but it can be divided up almost endlessly. So for the synoptics, there are 228 different logia that I explore. With the Acts of the Apostles, there are over 100 that I explore.
Oh, I mean, it's rich. It's rich with examples. I love
it. So, this is the biggest bargain in biblical scholarship out there right now.
Truly. It's not exaggerating. Yeah.
No, and soon the price will double.
Yeah. Get it now. And we're not trying to. I mean, seriously, you guys, I have bought some of Dennis's books were $90, and I bought them with pure joy, and I read them enthralled. It's not about the money. On this topic, really, truly, you get what you pay for, and you really do get your money's worth. I can verify that. I have not been disappointed at all in anything Dennis has written. Now, this is, I'm not trying to butter you up, Dennis. I don't believe in doing that. But there are some scholars whom I have 4 or 5 books of theirs, and 2 of them are really good that I just really got a lot out of, and a couple of them I go, not so much. I have not done that with any of yours,
Well, that's
and
just
that amazes me too. I'm not just saying that to because you're my guest here. Well, you know that I did that one video over a year ago, ranting and raving about you too, because
no, you
it's
did.
so refreshing to get this angle. This now, and I'm going to tell this for my audience sake, and you guys will know this. Oh, thank you, Radio Free Mormon. Bless your heart. Thank you for showing up. Radio Free Mormon is one of the most prominent commentators on the internet and the YouTube right now on this transitional Mormonism thing. But what I love about this is I'm really serious. There is some incredible scholarship in these texts, but it's some scholars, like Reitzenstein. I mean, come on. Yeah, you have whole paragraphs in the Greek, or you have whole paragraphs in the German, and they don't bother to translate them. Now those are okay. Those are good. I mean, I get my dictionaries out and translate them myself anyway, but it takes so much time. Dennis hasn't done that with this, and yet it's obvious he's put the scholarship in it, but I can read it. I can't tell you how important that is. It's scholarly. It is. I'm not going to hold that back from you, but it's accessible. And I don't know how you do that, Dennis, because like you're saying, one, you almost have to be familiar with these Greek epics somewhat mildly. Look, it's even going to help you guys seriously. If you just can't make the time to study the Greek epics, which I think you're cheating yourselves if you don't, get the Cliff Notes version and get an outline of them at least, because the story parallels that are discussed in the Greek materials and then in the Gospels, I'm always going, oh, I never thought of it that way. And it helps me appreciate both the Greeks and the Bible. And
I want to say something autobiographically about myself in
the
discovery of these things. And then I wanted to give my own introduction to the Synopsis, if I could.
Sure.
I grew up in the home of a fundamentalist Baptist pastor and missionary. And so I knew the gospel stories well. But when I went to graduate school, I became enchanted by not only Greek mythology, but even more so Greek literature. And the Homeric epics are both mythology, but they're also literature. And they became literature that was foundational to the Greek identity. And I became friends with a scholar named Albert Lord, who is the author of a famous book on Homeric epic called The Singer of Tales. And Albert said to me, why is it that New Testament scholars ignore the most important poetry that was around in the Roman Empire? That is epic, both in Greek, that is the Homeric epics and other in the epic cycle, and the Homeric hymns, and Virgil's Aeneid, and to some extent the Morphoses of Ovid. So I turned my attention to that because I thought I knew the Gospels pretty well, and it was just one eureka after another. And I was fortunate enough to have a scholarship at Harvard that allowed me to study with classicists and to understand archaic Greek and to be able to translate these things in a way that most New Testament scholars have not been able to. And I don't consider myself a genius, although I know some people have labeled me as that. I consider myself a fortunate beggar who found bread and wants to share it, because these are discoveries that are not going away. They have to be accounted for in some way. Now, one can account for them in many ways. You can account for them as conscious literary manipulation, even plagiarism. I don't think they're plagiaristic at all. I think they're full of alternative meanings. You could say it's a part of um, Greek culture, that you have Homeric radiation everywhere. So you could say it's an accident, but one has to account for some of these. And I have chosen one model to talk about where you can see how this works. But I want to say something more about synopses of epic tragedy and the Gospels,
Yeah.
which is a reference work, but it's a reference work in 3 volumes.
It is. Yeah.
The first volume is a synoptic, a mimetic synopsis of 4 Gospels. That is Q plus, which is my reconstruction of the Lost Gospel, Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Imitations of Deuteronomy, Homer, and Athenian tragedies. Now, Carrie, the reason that this is important is that there are 4 huge deficiencies in all previous synopses, including the wonderful Greek synopsis of Aland and also of Huckreven. Namely, that they put the Gospels in canonical order, not in chronological order, so that they're presented as Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then sometimes John.
Right.
That's one deficiency. Another deficiency is, why don't they include the Acts of the Apostles, which is a part of Luke's literary project? Because to understand Luke, you have to understand the Acts of the Apostles, where the voice of this author is even more clear than it is in the Gospels, because he's more or less on his own in composing. Another deficiency is to include the Gospel of John as though it's a coherent text. It probably was written in 3 different and consecutive compositional moments, each of which has its own social identity and theology. And one can actually stratify the Gospel of John into 3 different layers and compare them synoptically. But that's not how it appears in other synopses. And the most serious problem is that there is no place in earlier synopses of the Gospels anywhere, in English, in Greek, in German, in French, that includes texts that weren't written by Christians or Jews. It's though these authors are living in a cultural bubble that is not influenced by things that are influencing everybody else. And so we really need to have a larger understanding. Another is this difference between scribalism and mimesis. These authors are not scribes. They're authors. They're artists. They're using the literature that is around in order, and this is important, Gary. In order to create an ideology that works for new social identities as the Christian church is growing, so that it's trying to carve out its identity not only related to Judaism, but also to the Greco-Roman world, much the way that Philo and Josephus are struggling to create a Judaism that's palpable or acceptable to Romans and to the Greek culture under Rome. So that's why you have volumes 2 and 3. Volume 2 is a mimetic synchresis, that is a comparison of the Acts of the Apostles, that is imitations of Homer, Euripides, and rivalry with the Iliad. And volume 3, a mimetic synopsis of 3 Gospels of John, imitations of the synoptics and Euripides of Bacchae. And Carrie, we had a wonderful session at one point in talking about the Dionysian Gospel. Which really got you juiced up.
Dennis, that's still my favorite book, man. What can't you make out? What can't you make out, Radio Free Mormon? Talk to me. Is Dennis coming through clear? I can hear him perfectly. So let me know in the comments. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Anyway, yeah. So Dennis, let me ask you a quick question. We are better to view the gospel author. Do you think they were writing? Do you think they thought that they were writing scripture or literature?
They certainly didn't think they were writing scripture.
Okay.
What they were writing, in my view, is foundational literature about three different aspects of the movement that they were valorizing. One is, who is Jesus?
Okay.
As the leader of the community. And that's why we have such Christological diversity. Is Jesus a donor deity, as he is in the Gospel of John? Is the ideal martyr, as he is in the Gospel of Matthew? Is the consummate teacher, as he is in the Gospel of Matthew, and so on? So that's one piece. Another piece is, who are the good guys? That is, what is the in-group? What do they stand for? What are their ethics? What do they expect to happen in the future? How do they treat each other? How are they supposed to organize life, and so on?
This is kind of the social identity thing you've
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, I'm following you then. I'm following you. Yeah, that's really important. That's something I had never before thought of, but that's really cool stuff.
And the third is actually just as important. Who are the bad guys? Is it and it changes from time to time. In some texts, it's the Gentiles. Sometimes it's the chief priests, as in the Gospel of Mark. Sometimes it's the Pharisees, as it was in the Q document. Sometimes it's the Roman Empire. And so this group is using narrative brilliantly in order to establish its identity and its boundaries. And that's a part of what social identity criticism is about. And and my synopsis is pretty heavy on that.
So Dennis, based on that, you wouldn't necessarily be bothered at all if there's contradictions between the Gospels. I mean, that's almost to be expected. That really doesn't take away from their value at all, does it?
Oh, the differences are the beauty of it, Kerry.
Right. I love this. Yes.
Because the Q document is coming from a time before the Jewish War. And the big issues are the restrictions of Jewish law on people. And Jesus is represented in the Q document as making the law more tolerable for the marginal in society. That's why Jesus says in the Q document, I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. He's criticized for eating with tax collectors and sinners.
Yeah.
The story about
and hanging out with those women.
and the adulterous woman story is coming from Q, in my judgment, and so that's in my reconstruction. But by the time you get to Luke, writing in the 2nd century, the issue has to do with Roman identity and the church's place in the Roman Empire. Matthew's concern is written about 3 decades earlier, is what is the role of the Christian church inside of Judaism? And to what extent does it accept Judaism or not? The issues for the Gospel of John have to do with how does the new Christian movement relate to Dionysian religion. So what's driving the differences of the Gospels is an understandable difference in their social identities. And these authors are doing their best. And by the way, I think they're doing a brilliant but flawed job in doing it. Mm-hmm. So I'm very appreciative of these authors because they're trying to give their readers a better foundational mythology than what they've been reading. So Matthew's trying to improve on Mark. Luke's trying to improve on Matthew and Mark, and according, in my view.
And then isn't
John's
it Matthew and Luke who use Q?
Well, I think Mark uses Q too myself. So that's it's one of my unusual spins. So no, to understand these authors as being homogeneous is like saying the only milk we want to drink is homogenized milk, and we'll never have cheese or yogurt or sour cream.
Oh, what an analogy. I love that. I'm going to steal that from you, man. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I'm stealing it. I'm stealing it from others. I'm not
impressed with gospel harmonies at all. That just doesn't, that to me, that just doesn't make sense. And honestly, not to change this subject too much, but part of the problem in the Mormon church is this attempt, it seems to me, that they want to harmonize the Mormon view in the Mormon scriptures. They want to harmonize the Bible to the Mormon view. They Mormonize the Bible is how I've termed it before. And I don't see that as being valuable. But then they focus on trying to historicize theology instead of appreciate the human dimension, the differences. They don't like the idea that there are differences. They want it all to be one harmonious doctrine, beginning from Adam and coming all the way through. I just don't see how that can be done. So,
Kerry, Kerry, it is not a Mormon issue. It's part of the Christian tradition. You can see it in Greek Orthodoxy. You can see it in Catholicism. That theology is interested in normativity and harmony. And so you have apologists in all these religions trying to harmonize things. Now, theology actually ought to be understood as ideologies of living communities and their authors who are trying to make sense of the nonsense of the world they're living in by, I saw a chat. I'm eager to read it. But, we'll look at it. But theology ought to be understood as social ideology discussions. And the fact that you have, I view all interests in making normative theology to be a new kind of idolatry. It's well, because what you want to do is you want to have a hegemonic, unified understanding. But if that theology does not account for diversity, including ethnic diversity, gender diversity, regional diversity, historical diversity, it really doesn't work. And what we're after is human wisdom and not divine revelation. And if you insist on divine revelation, then it should be unified. If you're talking about human wisdom, it's so wonderfully diverse.
I never looked at it quite that way. Yeah, that's good. I get that. Yeah. Interesting. This is my dear friend T.O. I just did a recording with him and posted it just a couple days ago. I bought MacDonald's Synopsis of Epic, Tragedy, and Gospels, brings Jewish and Christian lenses together via Greek literature, one of the most valuable contributions to New Testament studies. I will second that. Thank you, T.O.
Oh, T.O., you're
welcome. I'm so glad you're able to see Dennis here, and I hope to see some good questions. We have a chance to ask a world-class Bible scholar some really good questions on this here in a little while. Dennis, I would like, if you don't mind, I'm loving this. This is just so cool. I'm going to break in and say again, really serious, you guys, buy the book. You're never going to get this amount of scholarship for this excellent price. I wouldn't care if it wasn't on sale. I would tell you to buy the book. I bought this one. This just blows my mind, this one. This is so sensational, it's hard to describe. And then there's this. Sorry, I'm going to do some book plugs, Dennis, and then we'll get back on topic. This one is the first one I had. And it just blew my mind. I every page had something. I went back and looked up the guy, and I'm going, wow, that's why that happens. The other thing I noticed, and this will get me to segue into the next topic I would love to have you elaborate on. I have noticed, and I know you're not you saw yourself as an atheist, but some atheists, I will say it this way, I have noticed that some atheists have truly dumped on Jesus some of his actions, and I haven't known how to deal with that. Not that I cared to, but I thought, if I ever wanted to defend that, wow, what would I do? Your texts bring such an interesting dimension to the idea that these are comparative almost. Mimesis, they're imitations of the Greek epic, of Virgil, of Homer. And so it's not necessarily that Jesus is doing something bad, like when the swine ran over the cliff. Who does Jesus think he is, destroying a farmer's herd like that just to cast out a bunch of stupid demons? Couldn't he have done it a more economical way? Things like that. Yet your approach to this gives me a chance to say, well, if the idea is to take a wonderful Greek story and use it to create a story of Jesus that actually elevates him or enlarges him, say, either in even being a little wiser or a little more charitable in other instances for stuff like that, then it's not so much that Jesus is a jerk. It's that these men are showing, look, they knew their audiences knew the Greek stuff, right?
Okay, let me respond in two ways. One is I don't object to being identified as an atheist or an agnostic.
But you're not an enemy to Christianity.
No, let me finish.
Okay.
But both of those are terms that relate to what you don't believe in. I'd rather talk about myself as a Christian identified, humanist, theoskeptic. A Christian identified, humanist, theoskeptic.
I love that.
So, but that gets too wordy. Now,
it does, but what's the acronym for that? Christianized?
Yeah. So, but then I want to get to another piece. By comparing these stories, the issue is how Jesus can be more compassionate or more powerful. Now, I'm trying to talk about it dispassionately as a historian.
Sure.
But I find that gospel stories are trying to do something with Greek epic, which is really quite fascinating. Let me give you one example.
Absolutely. Give us 3 or 4.
In the story of Jesus and the Jesus and the Gerasene demoniac. Jesus travels with his 12 disciples and goes by ship and lands on a shore, encounters a monster who lives in caves. Think Polyphemus in the Odyssey. And finally exorcises 2,000 demons, sends them into swine, and gets rid of them. Now, the story in the Odyssey that is there is that Odysseus comes with 12 men, goes into a cave, and he finds this monster who eats his men, and Odysseus blinds him, steals his sheep, and sails away. Now, which of those two heroes would you say is more moral? The Jesus story or the Odysseus story? And I'll give you one example. I used to give my son at 13 stories that come from both Homer and from the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I did have him enrolled in Sunday school, so we knew something about gospel stories. So this was one that I told him. I told him the story of the Gerasene demoniac. which is like fee, fi, fo, fum, right? I smell the blood of an Englishman and Jack and Beanstalk. And then I told him the story of the gospel story. And I asked him at the end, which story did you like better? He says, oh, the story of Polyphemus is much more exciting. And then I said, who's going to be a better model for your life? Odysseus, who blinds this guy, or Jesus, who, gives him healing? And he says, oh, yeah, Jesus is going to be better. Today, my son is a nurse. Now, it's not because of that story, but as you said, it's not plagiarism. It's not innocent and mindless use of mythology.
Not at all.
It's structured into a moral world where the author is crafting Jesus over against Polyphemus to say that we have a different kind of hero. Get over it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, when you read these parallels, the thing that's amazing is you have so many of them too.
Oh, they go on and on. And I haven't discovered all of them. Honestly, I know I haven't.
But you can see that there was great intelligence put into these gospels. There's no question.
The idea that the authors were fishermen and not educated is really being challenged at so many levels. These are not the greatest intellectuals of the Greco-Roman world,
no,
or of the Greek-speaking early Roman Empire. But they are for their communities intellectuals, and they had, in order to accomplish what they're doing, they had to have a reasonable Greek education, because that's and of course the center of Greek education was Homeric epic.
Criminy, they were probably better Greek educated than we are in our society.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. That's why it's been so invisible to us. Because we don't understand. Hegel has a wonderful line that says that Homer was the oxygen that Greeks breathed. It's not the oxygen we breathe.
No.
And so this is why
degrees.
And this is why my friendship with Albert Lord was so important. He said, why is this stuff being ignored when it's so important and ubiquitous?
Yeah. So I wanted to segue into this just to let you talk about it a little bit, and then maybe we can do a couple of readings out of your book. You said you'd like to do that with a couple of these fabulous parallels, but let me just ask you, for the audience sake, would you just describe your view of the historical Jesus? Because this subject comes up all the time when you start talking New Testament, Gospels, or whatever.
Of course, and it should.
How do you approach that? How has your studies helped you appreciate or demonstrate material about Jesus?
Well, what I try to tell my students is to just imagine taking a text of the Gospel of Luke, where the mythologies are so widespread, from Jesus's infancy to his appearances after his resurrection, and just rub out everything you could attribute to mythology, whether you know, Lazarus and Dives in Hades and so on. Just get rid of it. What's left?
You wouldn't have a lot left, would you?
You have a huge amount left. That's the point. What about the Sermon on the Mount?
I must not have heard you right. If you take out the mythology of the story,
take out the mythology, you have most of the Gospel of Luke left. What about the parables? What about the ethical teachings? What about the prophecies? What about the disputes with Pharisees? What about?
I see where you're heading with this now. Okay.
So mimesis is simply the way that the tradition beautified a historical Jesus and an earlier text, which we call Q. And I don't expect everybody to buy into my Q. And I would say it's not arbitrary, but it is conjectural.
Yeah,
All right.
I'll
So,
check into that, and I intend on comparing you with Mark Goodacre. I know he's the big non-Q guy. It'll be
oh
fun to
no,
see.
but there's got to be a Q document, and I think actually we shouldn't even be debating it. But
Oh,
I'll
okay.
be happy to debate it. But I just think the evidence is so overwhelming, and it's overwhelming because we know that there are lots of lost documents from the ancient world. And as a classicist, I spend a lot of time trying to piece together lost texts of the Apocryphal Acts of Apostles, for example. Or there are other pieces that. So the idea that you can reconstruct a lost gospel from various pieces is a part of the philology of classics. The same thing happens with the reconstruction of the so-called Marcion Gospel. The Marcion Gospel doesn't exist any more than the Q document would be, but they both probably existed. But you have to reconstruct the Marcion Gospel, for which there is not a single fragment, from the testimony to it. And this is what you have in the Q document. Now, I don't think I know that I would commit to knowing any single thing Jesus said. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But I would insist that there was a historical Jesus and that the vision that he had was soon interpreted as an alternative kingdom of God to what you have in traditional Judaism. That Judaism had come to a point where its restrictions, especially by Torah enforcers, was too restrictive. Think of the Apostle Paul, for example. Think
Right.
even of Josephus in his statement about James the Just.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the Q document. So my understanding of Jesus from the Q document, and this will come as a surprise perhaps, he's a Christian Socrates. He wrote nothing. He influenced Greek society. Other people wrote about him, and they mocked him, as in the Aristophanes, in the plays of Aristophanes. He was valorized by Xenophon and also by Plato, but manipulated by Plato. And you have a number of other people who. So we know a lot about who Socrates was without being able to be confident of anything in particular he said. But in the Q document, we have things that Jesus, in the Q document, Jesus forgives a woman against Torah, a Torah commandment that she should be stoned, and
Stoned,
she
yeah.
never repents. He comes to call sinners, not the righteous. He says the law and the prophets were until John. After that, it's the kingdom of God. And then he talks about the kingdom of God as an ethic of compassion and inclusion. So he was, in the modern religious landscape, he would have been a liberal.
What?
And
Oh no,
he would have
Dennis!
been,
I can't show this video to anybody. You can't call Jesus a liberal.
well, he was trying to humanize Jewish law. And no, he wasn't a liberal in our sense, in that he still believed in God. He still believed in God's victory in the future through Jesus's return. He still thought obedience to Jewish law was a good idea, but he wasn't very happy with the rigorous enforcement of Jewish law. So we have analogies of this, Carrie, throughout the history of religion. One thinks of Mahatma Gandhi in Hinduism. One thinks of Martin King. One thinks of Cesar Chavez here in Chicago. And I think that we need to have less of a concern for the historical Jesus's ipsissima verba, exact words. But I think we can talk about his ipsissima vox. What was his voice? where was he in the society? And that
I like that.
and that Jesus gets lost when you mythologize Jesus. And that's why the subtitle of one of my books is From Jewish Teacher to Epic Hero.
Right there, mythologizing Jesus.
And if you want to know who Jesus was, you stay with the Jewish teacher side. And by the way, the Q document probably was written by a Jew, not a Christian. And he was a Jew who liked Jesus and thought he was the second Moses, the promised coming of Moses. So I personally am a huge fan of the historical Jesus. And my own political interests have a lot to do with correcting the disparities between wealth and poverty, and the inclusivity of people of color, and gender equality and compassion. So in my view, if you want to know, I think the historical Jesus was perceived to be a hero of compassion. And I think there's reason to think he probably was. After all, his challenge to Jewish law was probably what got him crucified.
Oh,
what else was there that he was saying?
Yeah, because I was listening to a podcast somewhere, and they said you do realize that might have been James Tabor, one of my other New Testament hero scholars.
Sure.
I mean, that guy does it all, doesn't he? He is so fun. But he said Jesus actually told the Romans, he said, when they said, are you the king of the Jews? And he goes, my kingdom is not of this world. And Pilate exonerated him. He said, oh, well, if you're not here to threaten Rome, he goes, how would I do that? My kingdom isn't even to this earth. Then he said, I wash my hands of the...
Okay, James Tabor and I are friends, but he's much more confident about the historical value of the Gospels than I am. And so those are texts those are texts that I would attribute to the creative tradition after Jesus.
Sure.
But one of the things that's important about your question, Carrie, that I so appreciate, I want to emphasize this. Some people have used mythologizing Jesus or mimesis criticism as a way to say that Jesus is simply mythology. I would say Jesus is wonderfully mythologized because he was significant to them. And to have a place in the religious marketplace, you needed a mythology to make sense of him. But there was a historical Jesus. I'm not as convinced as Tabor and others are that we can rescue Jesus's own words at his trial or whatever. I think the whole thing's mythologized. But I think we can posture Jesus into first century Judaism prior to the Jewish War and say that he was a champion of Jewish liberalism, even more liberal than the school of Hillel. And it was considered so extreme and difficult that the Romans tried to silence him in order to bring peace with the Jewish community just a few decades before the Jewish War.
Yeah, interesting. You know what, Dennis? That actually brings a phenomenal parallel right now to today, mostly for my audience, of the obvious factors involved. The church truly, and this is not a negative statement, but they will take it negative for whatever reason, but they are in the process of mythologizing Joseph Smith. Now, when folks begin that's why they keep back some aspects of the history of what he said or did, or who he was involved with, or where, etc., because from an image of a historical true prophet, that is not how a prophet would act, or that's not something a prophet would say. So let's not include that, etc. Now the historians come along and they find, wait a minute, that feels deceptive. And so it builds a mistrust, because this process of mythologizing Joseph Smith to be even greater than he was is appearing right in front of our eyes. And perhaps that's what was happening with Jesus. Give it a few more centuries, and I'm not going to be surprised at all. I won't be around, but I'll be surprised at all if Joseph Smith is euhemerized into a deity.
Well, but I think that's really fascinating. And I'm not an authority on Mormonism at all, certainly not the way you are. But in terms of social identity criticism, what happens is one finds that in early Mormonism, there were certain leaders who were representative of a certain a view and a revelation that they promulgated, and they've got followers around them. Mm-hmm. These people then identified with these heroic characters, right, and embodied the values that they had, and actually in the history of Mormonism, they gave kind of ethical passes to their heroes because their heroes were heroes. They did. And so you have a certain kind of a dicey history in the history of Mormon leaders. But this is common in social movements. So what Mormonism then found itself in struggle with is its identity inside of a dominantly Protestant Western America. And it had to create its own barriers between its identity and those with the outsiders. And sometimes that conflict between with the in-group and the outsiders became violent. And certainly there was an awful lot of ignorance on both sides about, about what was going on. Sure. So this is why social identity theory is so important. It helps us understand the way that human organisms, organizations function, how they valorize a hero. And I'm not at all surprised that Mormon heroes get mythologized over time. Yeah. But originally they had a different function, and it was to give identity to these people who identified with this vision. And the vision then caused hostility with others. Well, that's what happened in Judaism in the first century, in my view, that Jesus became a reformer and a prophet who was proclaiming a kingdom of God that was at variance with what was happening in Galilee with Pharisees and strict Torah observance. That created hostilities and disagreements. And over time, Jesus became mythologized. So I think the analogy with Mormon history is it's from my view, my perspective is obviously sophomoric, but I think there are some really interesting and pursuable topics there. Yeah, there are. Okay, so now we get to do a little fun, Dennis, if that's okay with you. Oh, I don't like fun. I don't like fun. You're lying, Yeah. When you researched, in the process of your research, what are some of your favorite mimetic instances in the Gospels? And do you want to look at a couple in this, and you read one side and I'll read the other? And I'm going to suggest we only do one. Okay. And then we entertain whatever questions that come up and see where that's. Oh, great idea. Yeah, I've got
absolutely everybody in my audience are all the intelligent ones tonight. So this is good. Okay, which one do you like the best?
Let's
What
turn
one do
to
you want
page 278.
278. Okay, got it.
Okay, at the very top of the page, you see three parallels.
Right.
One from Mark, one from Matthew, one from Luke.
Okay.
Right, in canonical order.
Yep.
At the end of the Markan column, we have this. The disciples all abandoned him and fled. Verse 51. And a certain young man was following him, wearing a linen cloth over his naked body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and fled naked. Now, isn't that strange?
Yeah.
Jesus is there at night with a man who only has a linen cloth over his naked body. And Morton Smith, in my view, created a whole forgery on the secret gospel of Mark on the basis of this. Now, take a look at the page, Gary. Does Matthew have anything similar to that? Does Matthew have a parallel to verses 51, 52?
No.
No, it doesn't. Does Luke have a parallel to it?
No.
No. They think they're embarrassed by it. So they're on the synopsis, they see this as a problem. To have Jesus at night of his arrest being with
That's interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So on the next page 279, can you show us a picture of a naked young man coming from the netherworld? That's Elpenor, who's coming, and I'm going to read a passage then from 278. Mark's fleeing naked young man and Homer's Elpenor. Matthew and Luke and John retain nothing of Mark 14, 51 to 52 about the nameless youth who fled at Jesus' arrest. And for nearly 2 millennia, readers have speculated over his identity. Mimesis of the Odyssey provides a literary ID. These two verses are not merely a cameo appearance of a minor character, but a strategic setup for the stories of Jesus' death and resurrection to follow, but only in Mark. So the mysterious man visually resembles Jesus as his death. I won't go into that, but take a look at the box in below it. This is the passage we just read. I just read. And then I'm going to have you read the stuff in the box that says Mark 16:5. Okay.
Oh, all right. Yep.
The disciples fled with Neoniskos wearing peribeblemenos, a linen cloth over his nakedness. They seized him, but he abandoned his linen cloak and fled away naked.
Okay. The women came to the tomb and saw Neoniskos.
Yep. Good for you.
Huh?
Yes, good for you.
Wearing peribeplemenon, a white robe, sitting in the tomb. Oh, on the right. Wait a minute.
Yes, so he's the young man at the tomb. In Mark, it's not an angel at the tomb. It's a young man at the tomb. And at the arrest, he's wearing a linen cloth and he flees away naked. He reappears in the tomb wearing a white robe. Now, when Jesus dies, he's wearing a sindone. After he dies, he's wrapped in a sindone, the same word that's used. So he's a counter hero. But let's drop down. I'll start reading the second to last paragraph at the bottom of the page. The Markan evangelist modeled his mysterious youth after Homer's Elpenor, Odysseus' tragic comrade, whom ancient artists depicted nude. His name is significant. Elpenor, hoping for manliness, longing one day to become like the rest of his companions, whom Odysseus had just called very manly, Agenor. Elpenor's first appearance occurs in Odysseus 10 after Circe's feast and just before Odysseus sets out for Hades to consult Tiresias, the blind seer. As the hero himself recalls it for the Phaeacians, there was a man, Elpenor, the youngest, not particularly brave or gifted in mind, brave in battle or gifted in mind. Apart from his companions in Circe's sacred home, he sought fresh air and lay down to sleep, sodden with wine. When he heard the din and roar of men on the move, he jumped up at once. It escaped his mind to climb back down the long ladder, and he fell down from the roof. His neck broke from his spine, and his soul went down to the house of Hades. In Odyssey 11, Elpenor so emerges from Hades and begs Odysseus to honor him with funeral rites befitting a hero, which he most certainly was not. At the beginning of Book 12 and at dawn, Odysseus dutifully buries his young comrade back at Circe's island. Yeah. His construction of a barrow with a stele resembles the memorial shrines of Homeric heroes, but instead of a weapon of war, Elpenor sported a servile symbol, his oar. In other words, Elpenor is an anti-hero, a syncresis, or a contrast to Odysseus.
Oh, so it appears perhaps Mark is transforming this.
That's exactly right. And Elpenor is identified with the netherworld because Odysseus, when he goes to the netherworld, talks to Elpenor. So now look what we have next. In fact, I'll let you read it, Carrie. As soon as early dawn appeared.
Yeah, under the picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as early dawn appeared, rosy-fingered, I sent comrades to the house of Circe to bring the corpse, dead Elpenor. Having felled logs at once, at the point where the land ran farthest into the sea, we buried him, grieving and shedding many tears. When the corpse and his armors had burned, we heaped up a tomb, hauled onto it a stela, and atop the tomb planted his well-crafted oar.
The young man in Mark sits at dawn inside an open tomb and notifies the weeping women of the resurrection. Here then is another syncresis. The weeping of Elpenor's tombs becomes joy at Jesus's. Although neither Matthew nor Luke retained the naked young man at the arrest, Luke provided his own imitation of Elpenor in the Acts of the Apostles, and Virgil imitates the same thing to talk about the two of his warriors who died. He met.
So a lot of people are imitating this story.
Yes, it was very common to have a young man who visits the netherworld and comes back to talk about the dead. You have it in Plato's myth of for example.
The myth of yes.
The soldier comes back and talks about what he had in the dead.
Wow.
Now, there are some
Republic, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, at the end of the Republic. Very good. Yeah, Book 10. So this is an example of, one will never understand the significance of the naked young man at Jesus's arrest and a naked young man at the tomb if you don't know Homer. I'll just say it outright. You don't understand these texts until you understand the antitext.
Or read Morton Smith.
Oh, no, you don't. I actually have my own. I knew Morton Smith.
Tag, you're it.
I had dinner with him 2 weeks before he died, and I had people say I killed him, but that's not.
Oh,
that's a
no.
story. He died 2 weeks after he had he and I had a major row. I was in New York teaching, and we had dinner at the Columbia Faculty Club. And I gave a lecture afterwards, and he stood up and was just irate, absolutely, because of this very story. And in 2 weeks, he had died. Yeah. I didn't kill him.
What an
It was. I
experience,
wasn't. I
What
could
an
have been.
experience. Well, when we get together and have dinner together, I don't want you to kick off 2 weeks later. You stick around. You got more to say. Now
Well,
you are actually, speaking of which, just real quick, you are actually this magnificent capstone book to your career. This isn't actually going to be your last book either, is it? You've still got more in you that you're going to pump out.
I'm working on another book. The way I'd like to express it is that, Carrie, this book is a reference work,
Uh-huh.
and it's like an encyclopedia. The next
Right.
book I'm doing is an argument. It's
Oh,
arguing that the synoptic problem will never be properly recognized and solved until there are three things that happen. One is that scholars recognize the influence of Greek poetry,
mhm.
because that cements Mark as the earliest of the Gospels, and it removes some of the material. It explains a lot of the material. The second is you have to get the Q document right, not just that it existed, but you have to use very careful criteria for reconstructing the Q document to understand its place, not because it is a word for word recall of Jesus's statements, but because it represents his voice. The third, and perhaps the most important one, Carrie, and this is why I appreciate this discussion so much, we have to replace redaction with mimesis, that these authors are not scribes. They're artists.
They're artists, yeah.
And so mimesis is a larger category for understanding this creativity.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
by the way, in your own work and in your own imagination, you really understand this from what I understand what you're about. Namely, that we're not talking about wooden and conservative scribalism. We're talking about imaginative reconstructions of reality through narrative. And I think unless we can loosen up our categories of intertextuality, we're going to be stuck where we've been for a long time.
Yeah. Well, the more parallels that I've been able to find in your works, in several of your other books too, the more it's dawned on me that this really opens up a respect for these authors that I never had before, not even as an apologist. For whatever reason, it's just the theology that I was raised in. We believe in the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. So, of course, every time there's something different in the Bible than in the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants or whatever, it's always the Bible's fault, right? Well, I was raised with that for 40 flipping years. And your work has helped me appreciate the idea of a mistranslation isn't nearly as important to see why there are differences than the principle of mimesis, that there is an incredible intellectual achievement. And like you said, they're not fishermen, but they're not the academy of their day either. But there is a tremendous amount of intellectual success here in these Gospels that I have never appreciated before at all.
Yeah.
And
And
so
I don't
that's
think
one of the very fun things about reading all your materials.
well, and that's what's made it so fun for me.
Absolutely.
That
I believe it. Yeah. I envy you for all of this fantastic discovery. Yeah.
No, yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. That's cool.
it's been
Okay.
a
So
pleasure.
do you mind if I open it up to questions?
Oh, please.
Yeah. Let's have some questions for Dr. I noticed a couple of earlier ones where they were asking about the Q gospel and what evidence you had for the Q. I can't remember who was asking, but let's see if I can find it. You guys feel free to start asking questions of Dr. MacDonald. I'll try to get back to, I think it was Doug. Vincent that was asking about it. These guys are such a wonderful audience. They talk like crazy to each other, and they really get into all this stuff. Okay, I can't find it, but ask it again, whoever asked it about Q. Oh, here we go. Here's a question for you, Dennis, from Patty Cake. So was Jesus modeled on the Greek epics?
Yes, by the gospel authors, he was. And their favorite topics were Odysseus, because Odysseus suffered so dramatically and was so superior to his comrades, and was kept his identity a secret, and loved his home. So he was a great example for suffering. Hector was a great example for heroic death. Even though he thought his gods had abandoned him, he was courageous and met a noble death. The Euripides Bacchae was important. The Dionysus in Greek epic, Greek tragedy, was important because because Dionysus was a donor deity, and he changed water into wine. And produce wine for the Maenads and water to the Maenads in the so. But Patty, the one part I don't want you to take away from my response is that there is so much more of the Jesus in the Gospels than what could be attributed to Greek epics. And that's one of the things we can talk about with the Q document or the historical Jesus and so on. So I don't want you to think that Jesus was crafted out of the Greek epics. I want you to think that he was exalted by using narratives from the epics to talk about the significance of Jesus. But the imitations of Greek epics is only a way of clearing away the debris so we can find a historical Jesus.
Very good. And she asks a follow-up question. Does Dennis believe Jesus was the Son of God?
No.
Nice, straight, and succinct. Okay, here's another one. Gordon Gamsey, thank you for the question. Is the event where Jesus calming the sea mimetically inspired by the Baal cycle?
No, I don't think so. I think the calming of the sea is really quite clearly coming from Odysseus's Aeolus episode, where Odysseus is unable to calm the sea that is caused by his associates opening the bag of winds, and Jesus's associates are unable to calm the sea. They wake Jesus, and Jesus is actually playing the role of Aeolus, the god of winds, by calming the sea. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, this is the Q question here from Doug Vincent, my dear friend Doug Vincent. We're actually working on a show together on something else. How do you know which parts belong to Q? What clues or markers are used to tease it out of the other text?
That's a very good question, and it's extremely complex. I can only tell you what the criteria are. I can't tell you what the concrete solutions are. In my view, the most important things to recognize are that the authors of the Synoptic Gospels wrote in this sequence: Mark, Matthew, Luke. But we often have content in Matthew that's earlier than Mark. Where did that come from? Especially in doublets, that is, places where Matthew has content that he gets from Mark and from somewhere else. Why is it that Luke, who probably knows Matthew and Mark, has content that's earlier than either one of them? Well, it's got to be coming from somewhere. So the most important criterion that I use is reversed priority. That is, where Matthew has content earlier than Mark, or Luke has content earlier than Mark or Matthew, and that has to be demonstrated from the Greek text in a careful way. Now, in my view, there are three criteria that determine whether one reading is earlier than another. And again, this gets deep in the weeds, Doug, and I'm sorry for it, but there's no alternative to it. One is the comparison, is one saying a part of a narrative, or does it stand independently? And the growth of the tradition is usually that a saying will produce a narrative, as opposed to a narrative being dissected into a single maxim or a single statement. So when you find something independent in one version and it's absorbed into a narrative in the second one seems to be secondary. Another is the criterion of improvement. If you can compare two sayings and one of them is clearly an improvement on the other, and there are all ways to understanding what improvement would be, but the tradition is not going to make Jesus dumber. It's always going to make him smarter. It's not going to make him less powerful. It's going to make him more powerful. It's not going to create problems. It's going to try to resolve problems.
Yeah, it enlarges Jesus.
So so sometimes you find in Matthew something that's that Mark has probably tried to improve. And so that would make it earlier. So that would be another one. The final one is atypicalities are more primitive than typicalities. That is, we know the writing styles of the various synoptic authors, and we can see what their vocabulary is, what their proclivities are grammatically, and so on. And when we find those typicalities, we're likely to attribute them to the author. But we may have parallels, and we often do. Actually, we've got about 40 of them in the New Testament, where the parallel in an earlier text has atypicalities. They don't represent the impulses of the gospel authors as we have them. So, Doug, I think the value of your question is this. We shouldn't make judgments about which text is early over another one because of theology. We have to do it because of philology. We have to get into the Greek. We have to understand what are the proclivities of the various authors. We have to, and by the way, Q scholars have done this for 100 years with great precision, and need we give them credit for it. They made several mistakes early on, and that has made people skeptical of the Q document. But it certainly is possible to reconstruct much of Q. And I think it's the most valuable resource we have to understanding the historical Jesus.
Yeah. So can you guys see why I'm going to utilize so much of Dr. MacDonald's materials in my own New Testament commentary this year? Yeah, baby. Okay, here's another great question. And this is again from our beloved Patty Cake. Was Jesus actually resurrected?
No.
No. Would you like to elaborate on that, or just keep it at no?
The historical,
the Acts would disagree with that, right? The description in Acts,
the whole New Testament would disagree with it. If Christ is not risen, our faith is in vain. That's what Paul says.
That's Paul. Yeah.
So, but Patty, I don't want to be cavalier with you, because your question is meaningful and it's important, and it's one that lots of viewers are going to share. I think we need to understand and take very seriously what we know about science and about death and about and then about social groups and mythologies. It's a lot more hopeful to say that Jesus, as the hero of these communities, was risen from the dead because it offers promise of eternal life. And this is one way that the church has tried to make bank on its parishioners by saying that we can offer eternal life. I think the issue is not eternal life, it ought to be hope. And I think resurrection is one way of talking about hope. And of course, living in an environmental crisis, as we all do, we all need hope. So I'm not trying to minimize the hopefulness of early Christians as they understood it is embodied in the resurrection. But if we take science seriously, and I think we absolutely must, that's why I'm a humanist, and I consider myself a scientist of sorts. I just don't see that there's any way we can rescue a Jesus who was raised. And actually, I think it was a lamentable theological development, but understandable.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great response. A good response. How is it possible? Here we go. Here is another real good. David McKay, thank you for your question, my friend. How is it possible that Matthew have content earlier than Mark if it is generally accepted that Mark appears at least a decade prior to Matthew or Luke? Does that mean that Mark was modified?
David, it doesn't mean that Mark was modified, but it's a great question. The reason that Matthew has content earlier than Mark is he knows the Q document. And we see this especially in some, again, this is very scientific, but the doublets, where Matthew has content one kind, it comes from Mark, and it's always more developed than Mark. It's secondary. And then he has another version of it somewhere else, and it's more primitive. So it's not that you have multiple versions of Mark, it's rather you have Mark in another document that has content that's more primitive and probably that Mark knew.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if this is a question, but it's a good comment by my dear friend Tim Rathbone, whom I have had on my show. According to Joseph Campbell, it's internal, not external. When one views it as an internal resurrection, then it changes.
Okay, let me think that through. Just a minute. According
Sure.
to Joseph Campbell. By the way, I'm a fan of Joseph Campbell with qualifications.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh. Did I lose you?
No, you didn't lose me. I'm just trying to think through an answer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you look like you froze for a sec. So, all right, good.
Tim, I may ask you to rephrase it. Joseph Campbell, in his understanding of mythology, is interested in how mythology works with the universal subconscious. That is, he's a Jungian at heart. And so he talks about a hero with 1,000 faces, so that notions of resurrection appear within Greek religion and Indian religion, in Asian Hindu religion, and so on. Not because of the cultures only, but because of the way that the human is created. That is, that we have this universal subconscious that latches onto mythologies that are meaningful. I'm more interested in what folklorists do with mythology. That is, they relate it to different societies, that is, different cultures. And so these are called ecotypes or household variations of the universals. So I'm less interested in universals than I am in the special social functions of these things. So for Campbell, if what I have here is internal resurrection, would be for him a way of talking about hope in the midst of struggle of life and uncertainty. I think it has that function, but I think it also has the function of offering hopes to social groups about the vindication of their sufferings and making sense of life. So, Tim, that may not be exactly what you were after, but I'm glad you brought Joseph Campbell into the discussion.
Yeah, he's a fun read for me too, Dennis. I've enjoyed his works immensely. He kind of helped me keep on a spiritual type path somewhat.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Our dear friend Patty Cake has another question. Is reincarnation a possibility, Dennis?
I'm really not a metaphysician or a theologian, Patty. So I do think, no, I don't think that reincarnation is a possibility. But I also think that I have a very good friend who claims that in his infancy, he was sure that he had a previous existence. And I'm not in a position to say that his experience was not valid. And there's a branch of psychology that actually has studied various testimonies of people that say that they had experiences of earlier lives. And is this a psychological ruse? Is it a pathology? Does it relate to reality? I doubt it relates to reality, but it is reality for these people. I think the reason for reincarnation, especially if we go back to the Platonic version of reincarnation, is that human beings, all of us, screw up. And we need a second chance.
Or third for me.
And a third. Oh, okay. And sometimes reincarnation is not necessary because in the end we get it right. And we don't have to take a body any longer. And we can be with the stars fixed in the firmament. This is the Platonic version, the Socratic version, anyway. So I think reincarnation has to do with a process of trying to make human life better and to give us encouragement to do the right thing, so that we can purify our lives in such a way that we finally get it right and we don't have to be reincarnated. For Plato, to be reincarnated, if you've been really bad in life, could mean that you become reincarnated into a donkey or an ant. So we don't have to worry about that.
Good answer. Okay, my dear and lovely friend Geoplanet Jane asks Carrie, what does our guest think about those who claim to have had near-death, out-of-body experiences, seeing God, Jesus, dead relatives, etc., and then being told they needed to return to this realm?
I actually have a friend who is a big believer in near-death experiences. And I don't know the science of it as well as he does. And there is a branch of psychology that studies these things. So I would be fatuous and arrogant to weigh in on that question. But I think that our minds are so complex, and they probably have a function after we stop breathing. And I'm not denying that people have those experiences, but I wouldn't be surprised that with resuscitation, that people recall things that their minds were doing as a way of coping or finding hope or whatever. Geoplanet, I want to put it this way, I guess, if I can, as candidly as I can. I think it's a diversion to think about an afterlife, whether it's reincarnation, whether it's resurrection, whether near-death experience helps. I think religion has tried to, especially the Christian religion, including Mormonism, has tried to make bank on we offer eternal life, or we offer the way that I want to be known after I'm dead is in a book called Synopsis of Epic Tragedy and the Gospels. That's going to be my immortality. And I think the immortality that we have of raising good children and of protecting the climate and making sure that income disparity is not a plague is going to be a better resurrection and a better legacy. Now, that sounds too romantic, perhaps. I'm not a scientist, so I think Geoplanet, your question's a good one. It's not one I am going to be very concerned about. I'm going to be concerned about making sure that my children and grandchildren thrive.
Yeah, I have come to, in my own kind of thinking, Dennis, I've kind of come to where I've said, and I don't mean this with any disrespect whatsoever to anybody else's belief either, but heaven can wait. I'm right here, right now. This is where my focus. I have to eat here. I have to breathe this air here. I get to interact with people here, and so. And when I'm asked, because Mormons do the same thing, Dennis, they really push the thinking, oh, well, what about, aren't you afraid you're not going to gain your celestial glory? And aren't you afraid you're not going to be with your families forever? There's always that fear factor and all. And I've come to the point where I say, I deal with my daily problems here as best I can. And yeah, I don't always solve everything, but when I get to there, if there is a there, then I'll deal with the problems there. And I've actually been asked, well, what are you going to tell Jesus when he talks to you and all that? And he tells you that you were wrong. And I say, well, then I'll correct it there and then. In the meantime, I'll do the best I can now. And I really don't mean that facetiously either. It's just, this is where we are, and we need to deal with our home here. T.O. Travis, T.M. Overly, and I actually did talk about that in the Cosmic Covenant of the Book of Enoch through Margaret Barker and Father Robert Murray. And we're going to continue that discussion too. So thank you, Jane, for that wonderful question. Yeah, there we go. And Jane just now posted. She said, I agree with Dennis. That's why my focus is now working to stop and reverse global warming.
Jane, bless you. There you go.
You just made a new friend, Jane. Way to go, girl. Yeah, baby, you rock. So there we have it. And so any other questions, you guys? We have another 6 hours, so start asking. Oh, no. Golden Thrasher, good. Oh, yeah, everybody hit the like button if you would be so kind. That would be nice. Thank you. That helps the demographics. I'm not trying to be vain. I'm small meat and potatoes, but it's a lot of fun. I am so blessed because I get to associate with such great people in my chat and on the telephone and through my emails and through videos like this and all. And I'm getting to meet so many doggone cool people. It's a good life. You be friends to have friends. You do good to share good and all that jazz. So it's a lot of fun. All right. Oh, here we go. David McKay, thank you for another question. Do you hold to the idea of Christ as an ultimate archetype, as Jordan Peterson subscribes to? That's interesting.
No, I don't. The first issue is, as soon as you talk about Christ, you're talking about a mythological overlay of Jesus. And I don't believe in any ultimates at all. I really don't. I don't think if the human life is so dependent on our sociology, our gender, our religious orientation, our political orientation, that any talk of archetypes or normativity for me is scary. And so I wouldn't talk about any archetypes. What I would say that the Christ symbol became an archetype for people who are identified with certain kinds of Christianity. If you see this, you can see this clearly in Orthodox art. You go into a Byzantine church and you'll see that Christ is the Christus Victor.
Yep.
And
or
that,
Pantocrator.
or that's right. And you have it then also in people talking about the cosmic Christ in modern theology. I just think that that is so far removed from the sociology of life that I'd rather talk about how the Jesus image became archetypal for concrete societies and how they filled that archetype with ethical meaning. So,
Interesting. I have a question for you, Dennis. Which Gospels which one of the Gospels did you enjoy the most, finding so many wonderful parallels out of the Greek epic literatures? Which is your favorite Gospel, or is that even a legit question?
Those are two different questions. One is, which one did I have the most fun with?
Yeah. Which one did you enjoy?
The next one is, which one do I have the most attachment to? I suppose the most fun one has got to be the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
You have these
I knew that one was
going all over the place. It's uses of the Q document. The author is so creative and adventuresome. But I think
you've done more work on Mark than any of the others too. So,
well, maybe so. I think I published more on Luke than in Luke Acts.
Really? Well, like I said, I confessed I don't have all of your books, and I've only got the Luke and Virgil one, which was fantastic.
But there's also Luke and the Politics of Homeric Imitation and so on. And the reason for that is that I think Luke is the most mature and learned of the gospel authors, and is interested in helping the emerging Christian community identify itself inside of the Roman Empire, not as a threat and not as a competitor, but as a culmination of some of the Augustan age values of bringing peace, for example. His interest in bringing Jews and Gentiles together is really magnificent. Yeah. His understanding of the kingdom of God as a continuing presence along with the Roman Empire. Yeah. His ability to sift through earlier gospels and to select things that contribute to his understanding of Jesus and Paul, for example, as really Jewish philosophers who make sense in the Greco-Roman world. So I would compare what Luke has done with what Josephus had done and what other Greek intellectuals did. So I think it was most fun to play with Mark. It was most impressive to play with Luke Acts.
Have you heard, another quick follow-up, have you heard the theory that Luke is actually Plutarch?
No, I haven't.
You haven't? I'll send you the link to the study that I've got. It is actually quite astonishing, at least from a non-scholar, but an intellectual, as you so kindly called me, and I'll take the label without question, because I love to study. I consider myself a serious student, but Luke could have been.
We all.
And I think that's a fascinating maybe. So It looks like, here's another one from our beloved Patty Cake. Thank you for the questions. Keep them coming, you guys. Do you believe in synchronicity, Dennis?
Carrie, do you know what she means by synchronicity?
Yeah, what do you mean by synchronicity, Patty Cake? If you would mind. And Geoplanet Jane, while she's recorrecting, says she's my official stylist too. She kept encouraging me to get a haircut so that I looked better on camera. It didn't help, but thank you anyway, Jane.
Well, I think what the synchronicity may mean from Patty Cake, and I'll let her clarify if this isn't right, is whether there are in the history of religion synchronic developments, so that you don't have to have a genetic relationship of ideas, but that ideas can emerge synchronically. One could make unrelated events. Sure. Yeah, but of course the crafting of such meaning, Patty Cake, is going to be a subjective. It's going to be people who see events and they put them together
to have
and to have meaning. That happens in life all the time, doesn't it? I have friends who say that they had an experience one day, and they were reminded of their father, and their father died that same day. Yeah. So, what does that mean? Or that you. So I do believe that. Now, of course, I don't know that there is such a thing as synchronicity. I do know that people put meaning together because they see events that may be unrelated, but they are meaningful to the way they relate them.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Any other questions, you guys? We're approaching an hour, 45 minutes. We probably we're pretty much having my run of the time, but what a great audience. Thank you tonight for your questions, you guys. I really appreciate it. I know this was a Thursday night live. Hey, David McKay has an interesting question for you, Dennis. Are you active in any particular church denomination?
No.
No? You don't go to church either?
No.
It's all good. Every day in life is church if you look at it in a certain way, David. So, but in a good way. Don't go sit in pews every day. And yeah. So
let me tell you why that's the case.
Okay. Yeah, please do.
I don't want to be in a church and be exposed to things that make me cynical. And I don't want to be there as a critic. But that doesn't mean that churches can't, in fact, embrace the kinds of things we've been talking about, David. And and there are certain religious experiences that I have in my neighborhood, let's say, where I think people are getting it right, and they're pushing in the right direction. But I become so cynical about the way pastors and the lectionary use the Bible that I'd rather not be so cynical and upset about it.
And that's kind of sad, Dennis, because I am in the same cotton picking boat. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is. So we've got to deal with it. How can we contact Dr. MacDonald? I forgot to describe your webpage and all that. I apologize.
Yeah, you can do the webpage. That's one way. And
Google him.
Yeah, Google me and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, Google Dr. MacDonald. That would be and David is very appreciative. Thank you, David. Thank you. I admire your perspectives. I'll have to look more into your work, which is very, very. I promise you will enjoy doing so. Tim Rathbone is asking for your URL. You don't know that right off the bat, do you?
The URL would be what my email address?
No, don't you have a website or something, a blog?
Oh, yes. The website is this. One word, Dennis R. MacDonald, M-A-C, .org.
.org. Hold on, I'm creating a banner. Dennis R. Tell me if I got this right, Dennis.
Dennis R. MacDonald .org. Oh, yes, that's it. There you have it.
Okay, that's
there are links to various videos and the books and so on.
Yeah, you also have an academia.edu page, don't you?
I do, but I don't use it much. Yeah.
Oh, don't you? Okay, well, you'd be better off contacting him here on that scrolling site there. Okay, let's see. Do you want to say this? Which city do you live in?
Claremont, California.
Claremont. There you go. Where does he eat regularly? Oh, where do you eat regularly, Dennis?
At home and in my retirement community. Thank you.
There you go. There you go. I do too, because my wife is such a great cook. So, yes. Let's see. No, I'm not going to give his home address, RFM. Smart Alec. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Here we go. I wanted to put up Heidi Christensen expresses her appreciation. Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate you being in the audience. You're always a good member in the chat in the audience, and I love you, girl. I appreciate this so much. Thank you. And Patty Cake has expressed her thanks. This has been so valuable. Thank you both so much. It has been our pleasure, and we will be doing this several more times this year in the up and coming years. Oh, hey, Dennis, do you mind? Dennis is just getting ready to go meet with Derek Lambert of Myth Vision, my dear friend and brother in arms in the video podcasting world. Thank you, Derek Lambert of Myth Vision. Big shout out, because he's the one who put me in touch with Dr. MacDonald, and we've all become good friends. But Dennis and Dr. MacDonald are putting together a college course. Would you like to explain what you're doing, Dennis? I think this is important. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about that.
I'm going to have to stop to get some dinner at some point soon, Carrie, but I'll be glad to tell you what it is. We're going to have 24 relatively short YouTube videos that are or videos of some kind, podcasts, that are going to be in a class. And the class is going to be entitled Reading the Gospels with One Eye on Greek Poetry. And most of it is going to be reading from the synopses. Mm-hmm. But then after we read the synopses, including the Greek parallels, Derek and I will have a discussion, but there also will be study questions. And so I'm hoping that this can be used in religious communities or in discussion groups, book groups, so that you can compare these two stories and then make your own judgments. So, for example, in the one we just talked about, here are the things to ponder. This is part of the class. Mm-hmm. Why does the Markan evangelist send the risen Jesus to Galilee and thus deprive the disciples of an appearance? That is, the Jesus, the young man in the tomb. Mm-hmm. tells the women to tell the disciples to go to Galilee, they'll see him, but they don't say anything.
They didn't.
So
Yeah.
they never see him.
Then he did.
Was Mark's portrayal of the three women positive or negative? Is he blaming the women for not telling the disciples to go to Galilee, or is he sympathetic to them? And so on. But there are going to be study questions or topics of discussion. And then we're going to have discussions online, apparently in the course. That's how I think it's going to work. So it's going to have 24 sessions. The first one's going to be a general introduction, and the final one will be a conclusion with what this means and where we go from here. But the ones from 2 to 23 are going to be readings from the synopses, very similar to what you and I did, Carrie.
Nice. Yeah. All right, good. And Jane, I will let you know when those courses become available. I know Dr. MacDonald has to run. One last question for you, my dear friend, is by my other very dear friend, Paul Osborne, whom has taught me so much about the Book of Abraham and Joseph Smith Papyri. Do you like McDonald's French fries, Dennis?
Paul, I don't think I've had McDonald's French fries in 15 years. I don't know how to respond. I can, though, say this. One time I was done with a lecture. No, I was done with a class, last class period. And the students brought me a bottle of sesame seeds. And I said, what in the world are these sesame seeds for? And it's the students said, it's in appreciation for your course, and it's for your buns. Sesame seed buns. So, you know,
you gotta love it. You gotta love it.
And by the way, the letter R stands for Ronald. I'm Dennis Ronald MacDonald.
It does,
That's why I suppress the Ronald MacDonald part.
That's awesome. Oh, how much fun is that? That's funny. Oh, and Trevor Luke is here. I just wanted to let you know Trevor got in here. Thank you.
Hi, Trevor. Yeah.
I know Trevor has told me several times how much he enjoys you. So thank you, Trevor. And you got Paul Osborne to laugh like crazy. So that's fun. So anyway, truly, we hate to break it off, but we really do have to go, you guys. Yeah. We love y'all. Thank you for showing up. Dennis, again, thank you. And I'm looking forward to having you on my show again and again and again.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
And we will have a ball. You guys can now see why I'm going to utilize his materials on this New Testament stuff.
Okay. So, I have a final word.
Yes, sir. You bet.
Use your creativity, my friends, to create something beautiful for a world that needs creative solutions. So that's what the gospel authors are trying to do. And if you want to live their legacy, create something beautiful.
Oh, I love that. That is perfect ending. I'm going to call it good right on that. Thank you, Dennis. I love you, man. You're awesome.